Hi, welcome back to the Property Finance Podcast. And today we're welcoming in 2026. We're a couple of weeks in, and I wanted to talk about a sort of no BS approach that I take to deals and kind of the first 20 or so questions that I like to ask when I see a deal. And this can be used either as a broker, as a lender, as a property investor, developer, whatever. These 20 questions kind of go across everything, if you like, and gives you a pretty good view of, right, this deal's worth doing or not. So the first bit I want to talk about is kind of the reality of the asset. So this is talking about sort of your first 4 questions that you want to ask when you're talking about the actual asset. So the first thing you want to look at is there anything that makes this unmortgageable? So as a broker, the first thing we're looking at is there anything that stops this being mortgaged either via a regular buy-to-let mortgage, commercial mortgage? Is there anything that's going to stop it on a bridge, for example? I mean, there's not much that can't be financed on a bridge, but even still, we like to know. So that's the first question. And we're looking for things like, does it have a kitchen, bathroom? I mean, that's literally the first thing. Does it have a kitchen, bathroom? Is there loads of work that needs to be done? Is it tenantable? That kind of thing. Because instantly, if it hasn't got a kitchen or bathroom, you know it's not going on to a buy-to-let mortgage. You know you're then looking at things like bridging finance, refurb finance, that kind of thing. So instantly, you can kind of set that expectation before you even get started. First question, we know where we're at product-wise. The other thing we want to look at is there any access issue? So is there any right-of-way covenants? Is there anything in there that's going to stop you being able to get access to that property, or has someone else got access over that property that you're kind of unaware of? So these are sort of the initial questions you want to be asking your solicitor as well. So is there any title issues that we need to be aware of? And this comes up more so on kind of auction properties, if you like, because chances are it's gone into auction because there's 9 times out of 10 something to hide or an issue that makes it unfinanceable by traditional methods. So asking those questions early, you need to be aware of. And we've had it quite a few times where people have had issues with title that would make it impossible to finance within the 28 days. The last thing you want to do is exchange, put your 10% down, and then not be able to finance within those 28 days. So that's the second thing is, are there any title issues, any right to wait issues, any covenant issues, anything like that you need to be aware of? Then the other thing that you obviously want to be looking at is, if it's new build development, is it buildable, kind of assumed in its current state? So if you're looking at things like your planning conditions, are you going to be able to build it as is? How many planning conditions need to be signed off before you can get started? Any pre-commencement issues that you need to be aware of, that kind of thing. So again, solicitor questions, planning consultant questions that you need to be looking at as well. Then, are there any tenancy risks? So we've had this actually on one recently, just before Christmas, where the tenancies that were in place were protected tenancies instantaneously. Most lenders just are not interested, because lenders are not interested in properties where there are protected tenancies in place, because they want to be able to get possession should they repossess. And that's a big thing with, if you're looking at, for example, social housing, supported living, anything like that, where lenders get most engaged with it and are sort of happiest to lend is where there's a clause within the contract that says that there'll be vacant possession on repossession. So for them, they always want to make sure if they're going to take over a property that they're going to be able to get the tenants out of there. So protected tenancies really are a problem. And we'll do another sort of podcast going into more detail about that. But yeah, we had that just before Christmas where that became an issue on a deal, and we had to move lenders in order to get that sorted. So they're the 4 questions when it comes to the actual asset. Then you start talking about the numbers. So you've got through the first 4 questions, then you start going into numbers. And this is more so for developments, refurbs, that kind of thing. But the first one is, are the costs actually real? So is there anything substantiating those costs? So a lot of people go on 3-day courses, and I talk a lot about this in previous episodes around kind of the education stuff, and people will go on 3-day courses. Oh yeah, you can build for £120 a square foot, you can build for £140 a square foot, you can build for £160 a square foot. It just isn't real. And you find that very, very quickly when you go through your first development deal and the QS comes back and goes, well, yeah, you can build the main sort of structure for £160 a square foot, but what about all your landscaping? What about your utilities? What about your roads? What about all these things that you just haven't accounted for within that pound a square foot? And I think it's very easy to come into a deal and look at it and go, okay, I can build for £160 a square foot. That's a great deal. I'm going to progress with that deal. I'm going to start paying out money. I'm going to start paying for valuations. I'm going to start paying for QS fees and all this kind of thing. And you could be 10, 15 grand into a deal before someone comes back and goes, well, actually, have you thought about the 25 grand that you're going to have to pay for your utilities? Have you thought about the 25 grand's worth of landscaping that you've got? Have you thought about all your pre-commencements? Have you thought about the cost of warranties? Have you thought about all of these costs that are involved in order to actually complete a development? Have you thought about all that? And have you factored those into the cost? And it's very, very easy for example, we've got one at the moment where the utility cost alone is getting close to 100 grand. Wasn't really factored for anywhere up until the QS came in and went, have you thought about that? Have you actually factored that into your figures? And the other thing as well is that it's the hidden cost. So for example, on this one where the utilities are costing nearly 100 grand, that has been dragging on for the best part of 6 months. So it's actually the cost of those delays and everything else as well. I've almost kind of gone off on a tangent and kind of done an episode just about numbers here, but that's kind of what you need to think about is, are the numbers real? Is there anything tangible behind the numbers? Or have you just come off a weekend course and gone, yeah, I can build for £140 a square foot? The second question under your numbers is, what's your contingency? Is there anywhere where it can be cut? Now, with that, I would always say that your contingency should never be cut. It should be grown. Because inevitably, no matter whether you are the best developer in the world or the worst developer in the world, you're still going to need a contingency because it actually has no relevance to your ability as a developer. It's what's in the ground. It's the unknowns. So what I would always say is, on a refurb or something like that, you're probably looking at a 7.5% contingency. On new build, I'd say it's anywhere between 10 and 15%. On commercial conversions, probably anywhere between 10 and 12.5%. So it's always worth checking that contingency. And people have contingencies in a few different columns. So they'll have a true contingency. So they'll take all of their build costs and they'll say, right, 10% on that. They'll then have, for example, so this is within their figures when they're sort of setting up, they'll also say, right, okay, well, my interest cost is going to be this amount. But actually, when you work it out, the interest cost is maybe half of what they've actually budgeted for. So within their budget, they've actually got a load of contingency within their interest costs as well. So contingency doesn't just have to be 10% of build cost. It could be something within interest, fees, everything else. Then the next one, when you're looking at numbers, is talking about GDVs. So what is your actual evidence of GDVs? And it's very easy to get pulled into, again, this whole thing of coming off a 3-day course and, oh yeah, you can just find all your comparables on Rightmove. Well, you can to a certain degree, but you need to understand how to find those comparables on Rightmove. You need to understand what you're looking for and actually sort of how to compare, because especially when it comes to new builds, it's very, very easy to just look at, so for example, in Lincolnshire, I come from a place called Spalding, and there's loads of new build stuff going on in Spalding, and it's very, very easy to look at something and go, oh, well, there's another 3-bed being built in Spalding. I'm building a 3-bed, so it must be the same as that. But you need to take into account, well, what's the square foot of that property? What's the pound a square foot? What's that closer to? Is it closer to the amenities? Is it closer to, so for example, you could be on one side of Spalding and you're closer to Peterborough. You could be the other side of Spalding and you're closer to Boston. Well, is it better to be closer to Boston? Is it better to be closer to Peterborough? Well, it's better to be closer to Peterborough because then you're closer to, for example, the 45-minute train into London. So by being the right side of Spalding, you're, in theory, getting a higher pound a square foot because you are closer to Peterborough, which is then closer to London, which is closer to commuters and people moving out of London, that kind of thing. Then on the flip side, you could say, well, actually Boston, Big Pilgrim Hospital, better for doctors, that kind of thing. Boston isn't the best place to live in, but Spalding, close enough, commutable. Could it be good for doctors and things like that? So there's little bits and pieces that you need to think about like that. And it just goes to show, I mean, Spalding is a market town. It's not particularly big. But even somewhere like that, just being one side of the town versus the other completely changes what you're looking at when it comes to comparables. So what I would say when looking at comparables is, yes, use Rightmove, yes, use Zoopla, use all of that data, but speak to local agents because they're boots on the ground. They understand. They are the ones who, that entire thing that I just said there about Spalding, they're the ones who are there. They understand the target audience. They understand that by being one side of the A16, you're getting this. By being the other side of the A16, you're getting that. By building this, you're getting that. By building that. And they can also help with, well, have you thought about putting a garage there? Or actually, not many people want a garage. So rather than the garage, convert it to another bedroom or convert it to a downstairs office. More people are working from home. They can help you kind of manipulate those GDVs a little bit. So I would always say get 3 agents sort of breakdowns of the GDV. That's always handy to have. And then obviously use Rightmove data and Zoopla data as well. And then the last question when it comes to your numbers is what happens if the valuation drops 10%? And you could also actually to this add what happens if the build costs go up 10% as well. So this isn't talking about contingency or anything like this. This is actually planning or trying to plan 18 months in advance or 6 months in advance if you're doing a refurb. And this is the same with refurbs, commercial conversions, new build developments, whatever it may be. It's about, well, actually, if my GDV does drop 10%, what do I do? Because, your profit is probably only 20% on GDV. If it drops 10%, all of a sudden your profit's coming down quite substantially, almost cut in half. So what are you going to do if that happens? Is it a case of you would then be able to refinance onto a buy-to-let and hold them for 18 months, 2 years, and then try selling them again? Is that going to help? Are you even in a position to do that? Do you need to think about maybe as you're going through? So we've had this a couple of times where people have seen their GDV drop. So going through the Liz Truss economy, we had loads of people who were sort of pivoting mid-development. Then we kind of after that, we've moved into, obviously the rates are getting slightly better. And again, people have pivoted again. And what I mean by pivoting is, for example, if someone's building maybe, actually we've got a live example. So someone's building 4 houses. I think it's a 2-bed, a 3-bed and 2 4-beds. Now the plan is their pivot, if you like, is that all of those properties have quite large roof spaces. So one of the things that they can do is the 2-bed, for example, they could convert that to a 3-story, 3-bed or even 4-bed, depending on whether they can get 1 or 2 bedrooms in the roof. That's their pivot there. So that increases the GDV there. We've had another deal where, for example, it was converting a barn. They were planning on doing it as one large dwelling, which was probably going to be worth about 800 grand on its own. Speaking to local agents, understanding the local market, pivoting as sort of the industry and everything else has changed with interest rates and everything else, they've decided actually rather than one dwelling to split it in half and have 2 semis. Those 2 semis are worth about 500 to 550 each. Obviously, that is more than the 800 grand they'd get as one single dwelling. So for them, it's about pivoting and being able to increase the GDV there. So it's just understanding, well, if my GDV comes down 10%, if my build costs go up 10%, what can I do to move and pivot? And we can kind of help with that as well. Then you move into kind of your third set of questions. So this is talking about the people involved. So this is your solicitors, your brokers, your builders, which lenders you're going to go to even. So what you need to think about is who's delivering the build. So if it's a refurb, who's doing it? Are you going to do some of the work yourself? Are you going to bring a builder in? Has the builder done something similar previously? And this became quite prudent on a deal that we did about 18 months, 2 years ago. We had some guys who were doing a commercial conversion and the builder had done very little that was similar previously. And it was a big sticking point. They really, really wanted to use this builder. They'd known him for years. He was a very good builder, but he'd done nothing of the scale that these guys wanted to do. So we found ourselves having to go to other lenders because we couldn't go to kind of the tier A lenders because they were like, well, the builder's just not good enough. We had to move into sort of tier B and tier C lenders because actually they were just so adamant they wanted to use this builder. And it all worked out in the end. The builder did a phenomenal job and it all came off without a hitch. But that is a big thing you need to think about is the experience of the builder. Are they liquid? And I've done loads of episodes about kind of choosing the right contractor previously, and I think it's worth going back and listening to those as well. The other thing as well is to think what your conduct has been like as a borrower. So what's your credit file like, for example? Because although development finance is asset-based lending and refurb finance is asset-based lending, your credit profile will come into it at some point. And we've had this previously. We've got one at the moment, actually, where a chap's had a couple of missed payments, and it means that some lenders don't want to lend. And again, it knocks some of those tier A lenders out. It means you're moving into tier B and tier C lenders, which the cost doesn't jump up that much, but it's enough to think, maybe I should just keep an eye on the credit rating a little bit. The other thing is, have you got any inconsistencies in your story? So if you've got your CV and you've got 27 new builds on there and the lenders look into it and they're looking at company's house and land registry and things like that, and they're looking at it saying, well, actually, none of these are in your name. And it transpires that you were a project manager on it rather than the developer or contractor. It just creates an inconsistency in the story. If you're portraying something as your development, make sure it's your development. If you're a project manager, great, that's still experience. Put it on your CV. I was a project manager. I delivered 27 units. Here they are. Here's where, as a project manager, I kept the costs to this. And that's, I think, really key for kind of putting that CV together. Just make sure that it's not, I'm trying to think of the best word, not inconsistent. That's probably the best way of putting it. Just, make sure that it matches. And then the last one is thinking about kind of who's making the decisions. So this kind of fits more into client-broker relationships. So it's more, if you want us to hold your hand through everything, more than happy to do that. We can do that. If you want to hand off more of the power to your contractor, for example, if you want them to get a bit more involved, that's fine. But just try and make it really clear early on who's making the decisions, who's doing what throughout the process, because lenders want to know that pretty quickly as well. Then bucket 4, if you like. So imagine we've put all of these into buckets so far. So you got your first one, which is talking about the asset, the second one, which is talking about your numbers, third one, which is talking about people. So bucket number 4 is going to be talking about timeline. So this is probably the biggest thing that comes up as a problem through all of these deals is actually, what is your timeline? What is your reality with that timeline? So you need to think, what's your critical path? So what is from here to completion, from here to completion of the build, from here to your first drawdown, what is the critical path of what needs to happen and when? That's straight away the thing that you need to think about. What is that path? And we help put that in place for a lot of developers. So we will sit and put those timelines in place to say, right, expect this to happen here, this to happen there, this to happen here. And it's also about relaying that to the vendor, the agent, and everything else. We've got one at the moment where the vendor is being particularly tricky. They want constant updates, which is fine. I understand why they want those constant updates. The difficulty is that they are getting those from the client. And the difficulty as the client is that sometimes you may not know what that critical path is. And that's where it's really, really key to have those conversations with your broker up front to say, right, what is this critical path of timescales? What am I expecting when? Because that needs to be relayed almost verbatim to the vendor in order to keep them on side. The other thing you need to think about as well is what are the most likely things to cause delays. So solicitors, instantaneously, the biggest delay we had at the end of 2025, without a shadow of a doubt. So you need to think, do I need a new solicitor? Do I need to maybe prompt them to say, look, this needs to be completed by this date? Do I need to G them up at certain stages? That really needs to be a thing, because without a shadow of a doubt, they are going to be the biggest delay in any deal. Same with the vendor solicitors as well. So there seems to be this thing of vendor solicitors causing delays and then blaming everyone else. And it's just the way it is, unfortunately, but really need to think kind of, if they're causing delays, sometimes you've got to have that conversation to say, your solicitor is causing the delays. I don't care what he's telling anyone else, but he is the cause of that delay. The other thing as well is that you need to think, what happens if this deal slips by 4, 6, 8 weeks? Is there going to be a case where the vendor pulls out? Do you need to maybe put something in place to say, right, we're going to have some sort of lockout agreement, which means that the vendor can't go and sell this to anyone else for a certain period of time? Do we need to set maybe a longer period of time to manage expectations? So if the vendor's saying, well, we need to complete in 8 weeks, you go to the vendor and say, well, look, we will try for 8 weeks, but it could slip to 12 weeks, and maybe set that expectation kind of up front. And then I guess the final question of this bucket is, are the timescales realistic? So if you are going to an auction, can you realistically complete in 28 days? And you have to think about that, because you have to think, am I going to get the lending through in 28 days? Am I going to get the legals through in 28 days? Is my solicitor good enough to do this in 28 days? Do I have a good enough lender to do this in 28 days? And this is where conversations with brokers obviously really, really help. But you have to think, is it realistic, and can I do this? Bucket number 5, this is your reality of your exit. So this is, what's plan A? What is the evidence of plan A? So we kind of spoke earlier about getting all of the different comparables and sort of sales data from agents and everything else. Your plan A is normally going to be sale or potentially a refinance. And the evidence of plan A is going to be whatever those conversations are with the agent. Then it's thinking, what's plan B? What's plan C? And final question is, what is the trigger to switch exits? So we said earlier about pivoting if costs move and things like that. But again, you've got to think, even if your GDV doesn't drop or your build costs don't increase, is there a trigger where, for example, you pivot from sale to refinance? And we've got one at the moment where he's building and he's already thinking, well, actually, I'd always planned to sell these, but actually my trigger to switch to refinance is actually if rents go up. So for him, there's a certain amount per month rental income that for him will be the trigger to switch exits. So if these houses hit a certain amount per month of rental income, he will go, well, actually, it makes more sense for me to pivot here, refinance them for a bit, keep that income, and then focus on building to sell on another site. So just think what that trigger is to switch those exits. But yeah, those are 20 questions, which I would always encourage you to ask before you do any deal. So just a very, very quick recap. So bucket one, so talking about the property. So what's something that will make it unmortgageable? Are there any issues, any access or title or right-of-way issues? Is it buildable as it is? Is there anything you need to be aware of? Are there any hidden tenancy risks or anything like that? Bucket number two, talking about your numbers. So are the costs real? Is there any evidence to the numbers in terms of your build costs? Is there a contingency? Does it need to be grown? Could it be cut? Your GDV, what evidence is there? So obviously getting the right comparable, speaking to the right agents. What happens if your valuation goes down by 10% or if your build costs increase by 10%? Then talking about your kind of people, your team around you. So who's delivering the build? What's your conduct been like? What's the story, if you like? Are there any inconsistencies in that story? Who's making decisions within your team? And then talking about the timeline, what's your critical path? It's very important, that one. What's the most likely delay? What's going to cause the biggest delays? What are the things you need to be aware of? What happens if it slips by 4, 6, 8 weeks? Is the timeline realistic as well? And then talking about your exit, plan A, plan B, plan C, and then what's your trigger to switch those exits. So hopefully you found that helpful. Please let me know if you did. Obviously all the usual stuff, comment, like, share, do all of that good stuff. It really does help the podcast. And otherwise, I'll catch you on the next one.